Good day, class. You are welcome to this literature class. I am Kayode Olugbola, your literature instructor for today's class. This e-learning platform is brought to us by Isaac Humanitarian Foundation. This is a foundation that focuses on helping students to provide solutions to their different academic challenges in their studies. So, today's class, we are going to discuss some of your recommended poems. In fact, I want to discuss just one so that we can have enough time to finish it up. We have recommended poems, and the first one is Vanity. Vanity, yes. In your syllabus, you have 6 African poems and 6 non-African poems. The 6 African poems are 1, Vanity; 2, you have your Ambush. 3, you have Piano and Drum. 4, you have Envy and the Hammer. 5, you have The Panic of Growing Older. And then the last one, number 6, you have The Dining Table. These are the 6 African poems you are meant to study for your exam. Both JAMB students and WAEC students. JAMB students, WAEC students, post-JAMB students. These are what you are going to read for your exam. You have Vanity, Ambush, Piano and Drum, Envy and the Hammer, The Panic of Growing Older, and The Dining Table. Vanity by Birago, Diop. Ambush by Bimisola Adeoti. Piano and Drum by Gabriel Okara. Envy and the Hammer by Kofi Awono. The Panic of Growing Older by Larry Peters. And The Dining Table by Aluel Banabon. These are the 6 African poems that are relevant to our studies, particularly for post-JAMB exams, WAEC examination, and JAMB examination. Then we also have 6 non-African poems. There are 6 non-African poems which you are going to study in the class. The first of them is Crossing the Bar. We have Crossing the Bar, that's the first one. Number 2, we have The Pulley is second poem. 3, we have The Schoolboy. Number 4, we have The Proud King. Number 5, we have Betches. Then the last one, which is number 6, we have Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Yes, that is the last point. So altogether, there are 12 poems in our syllabus. Now, Crossing the Bar is by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I decide to mention the names of the writers, the poets, because in your post-JAMB exams, you can be asked that. The Crossing the Bar is a poem by who? So you should know the writers of all your recommended texts. In fact, WAEC students, take note. Whatever question you want to answer in your theoretical aspect in your exam, make sure you always put the name of the author. For example, they ask you, explain harvest of corruption as a political word satire. If you want to start with after them, harvest of corruption, written by Frank Obodo Ogbeche. That will help you to convince the examiner or the markers. So we have number 1, Crossing the Bar by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Number 2, The Pulley by George Herbert. 3, The Schoolboy by William Blake. 4, The Proud King by William Morris. 6, Betches by Robert Frost. Then last one, 6, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day by William Shakespeare. These are the 6 points. Now, let's go straight to the business. Vanity by Birago. Vanity, Birago is from Senegal. He's a Senegalese. Yes. Birago is a Senegalese. Diop is a Senegalese. And we have a movement from Senegal called Negritude. Negritude, as a movement, was developed by the former Senegalese president, who was Leopold Senghor. I mentioned this in one of our previous classes. Leopold Senghor. Yes. This man, he was the independent president of Senegal, and he introduced that movement called Negritude. Leopold Senghor introduced Negritude as a movement mainly to celebrate African cultural and literary practices. That is, by that movement, he aimed at appreciating our literary styles of writing, our cultural values and content as African people. That's why today the movement has been handed over to African people today. That's why any work of art in modern time that promotes African culture ahead of its European counterpart, such a movement, such a work of art is called a Negritude work, and that is the class of this poem. Vanity, written by Birago, is an African poem, and it is a Negritude poem. Why? It celebrates African cultural content. It celebrates African culture as the best. That the culture is ahead of its European counterpart. No wonder in the poem, the poet persona condemns the irresponsibility and irresponsiveness of African people towards our cultural value system. That today the poem shows the poem shows the abandonment of the African culture in the pursuit of a European culture. That today most African people have long abandoned their culture. They now run after European culture and foreign religion. That is why the current state of problem that African people are experiencing is self-caused. Why? African people caused their own undoing. African people caused their own downfall. How? By neglecting originality in pursuit of of fake or counterfeit. And what's our originality that we neglect? Is our own culture. The poem claims that since African people have abandoned their own culture, that is the cause of their state of suffering today. That our continent is blessed. Africa is the most endowed continent of the world. Yet African people are still suffering. And what is the cause of our state of suffering? Is our negative attitude, our irresponsible act towards our cultural practices. Why? We have long abandoned our culture. We have left our religious, superstitious beliefs. We have left our traditional value system, and we have also neglected our ancestral worship. That is why today, when we complain, when we cry to the world will only hear us and laugh at us. Why? Because the world has seen that we are blind, deaf, and unworthy people, as we have in line. The poet persona calls African people blind, deaf, and unworthy sons who have seen nothing good in what their ancestors have left for them on land, on sea, and in the air. So, generally speaking, Vanity is a poem that shows the fruitless effort, the futile effort of African people outside their culture. Can you see the title? Vanity. The title is symbolic. It was borrowed from what? From Solomonic what? Expression in the Bible. Vanity upon vanity, all is vanity. In the Bible, Solomon expressed that vanity upon vanity, all is what? Vanity. Why? Human beings cannot achieve anything meaningful or tangible outside God. Why? Our life is dependent on what? On God. So also, by the time you bring that word to this poem, the poet persona adopts this title to what? To show the fruitlessness, the futile effort of African people outside what? Our culture. That as long as we don't promote our culture, as long as we don't show our identity as African people, we will continue to suffer. And the current problem happening in the country, the current world crisis, the current world socio-economic world regression that the continent is witnessing, the poet persona claims that what? It is self-caused or what? Self-inflicted. Why? He claims that the medium through which we can get solutions to our problems, we have long what? Abandoned them. And what is the medium? Our what? Ancestral worship. That we Africans, we what? We used to worship our what? Our dead ancestors. And when we worship them, things are what? Are in the state of what? Normalcy. Things were what? Normal in Africa. But since we abandoned what? Our ancestral worship, look at it now. We now have what? Abnormality as what? The order of the day in our what? In our continent. Therefore, the poem is used as a clarion call to awake sense of consciousness, responsible what? Act in African people that what? If we want a change of life, we should retrace our steps back to what? Our culture. Because in our culture, there lies what? Adequate solutions to our problems. And then in the poem again, the poet persona claims that our dead ancestors, they used to what? Act as middlemen. They transport what? Our prayers to Supreme God for what? For answers. That is when we used to what? To worship them. When Africans were worshiping what? Those dead ancestors. When we were promoting what? Our own cultural value system. When we continued in our religious, superstitious what? Beliefs, things were normal in Africa. Prayers were answered. Things were what? Were in orderly what? Manner. But then, ever since we abandoned our culture, our ancestral what? Worship, our national what? Value system, things changed for us. That's why no matter the level of our cry, no matter the level of our supplication, the spiritual world does not hear us again. Why? Those who act as middlemen, through which the spiritual world hears us, we have what? Long abandoned. And so from that, we can get a thing. The poem shows what? The disconnect, the great disconnect between what? Between African people and their ancestors. Why is there a disconnect between Africans and their ancestors? Why? The African people who are still living, they have shown what? Sense of irresponsibility towards what? Their culture, by neglecting who? Their ancestral worship, religious beliefs, and superstitious what? Beliefs. Hence, that accounts for what? For the problems that befall what? African people today. But the poet persona raises what? The hope of African people, that Africans, there is still hope. What is hope? We all should work towards what? The preservation of what? Our culture. Why? We should preserve our culture. We should cherish what? African cultural what? Content. We should show our identity as Africans. But as long as we don't hear our dead ancestors, as long as we don't cherish this culture, our condition will remain the same. These are the messages that are portrayed in what? In Vanity as a poem. So next, I will go through the word, the themes. What are the themes that are depicted in Vanity as a poem? The first thing is what? The abandonment of African culture. the abandonment of African culture. That's number one. The abandonment of African culture. Number two is what? The negligence of Africans. The negligence of Africans towards their culture. The negligence of Africans towards their culture. That's number two. The negligence of Africans towards their culture. Number three, the need for the preservation of African world customs. The need for the preservation of African culture. The need for the preservation of African culture. Now class, why did African people abandon their culture? Because they are now pursuing European world culture. So you can see that the poem shows what? The negative impact of colonialism on Africa. The negative impact of colonialism on African culture. Negative impact of colonialism on African culture. Yes, it was colonial penetration that made what Africans to forget what their culture today. African culture, yes. Another thing is that what? The poem is a mockery. The poem is a satire. Why? It condemns the what? Irresponsive attitudes of African people. Hence, the poem shows what? The self-inflicted problems of Africans. The self-inflicted problems of African people. The self-inflicted problems of Africans. These are the thematic preoccupations that are depicted in what? In the poem Vanity. Now, the last aspect under poetry is called poetic devices. Poetic or literary devices, yes. We want to examine the poetic or literary devices that are used in this poem. What are the figures of speech? The devices that are used to portray the themes of the poem. As I said, these are the themes we have in the poem. The poem shows the abandonment of African culture. It shows the negligence of Africans towards their culture. Number three, it shows the need for the preservation of African world cultural value system. Next is what? It shows the negative impact of colonialism on African culture. And lastly, I wrote the self-inflicted problems of Africans. And then let me have one more here. The poem also shows what? It shows the negative attitudes. The negative attitudes of Africans. The negative attitudes of Africans towards their culture, their cultural heritage. The poem shows the negative attitudes of Africans towards their cultural heritage, traditional values, religious superstitious beliefs, and ancestral worship. Yes, all these are depicted in the poem. These are what you will write down in your exam, particularly WAEC students who are writing what? Theoretical aspects. We have the negative attitudes of Africans towards their cultural heritage, traditional value system, religious superstitious beliefs, and their ancestral worship. Lastly, what are the poetic or literary devices? Poetic or literary devices used in the poem. Number one, we have diction. The language of the poem is simple. Diction means choice of words or language used by the poet. And of course, in this poem, the language of the poem reflects what? Simplicity that characterizes what? African culture. The poem is written in a simple and straightforward language, and the aim of doing that is that what? Is that the poet persona wants to show us the simplicity of life that what characterizes African cultural value system. Then why are we now running after complexity, which is what European language, when we have what simple life and nature here? Number two, we have imagery. If you look at this poem, the poem is a mockery on the poem is a mockery on the unenviable lifestyle of who? African people. So Africans are not enjoying, according to the poem, Africans are what? Are not celebrating, rather, they are suffering. We can see from what? From the choice of words that what? That the continent is what? Is bedeviled by what? By irresponsive act of what? Of his people. So the image therefore is, we have visual imagery. Imagery of what? Of hardship, suffering, and difficulty as what? The resultant effect of what? Our negative attitude towards what? Our culture. That's number two. Number three, we have symbolism. Symbolism, don't forget, symbolism is when you can give deeper or literary meaning to a particular word other than the way it is being used. When a particular word has a deeper or literary meaning other than what? Than the way it is being used, that word is symbolic. And here is the word in the poem, the title itself. The title is symbolic. Why is it symbolic? It shows the futile or fruitless effort of African people outside their culture. That as long as Africans don't maintain their what? Their African identity, we don't show what? We don't exhibit or display what? Our own cultural value system. All our effort is what? Vanity. So that title is what? Is symbolic. Then if you check the poem contains the following figure of speech. We have syntactic parallelism. There is syntactic parallelism in the poem. That's number one. Number two, we have rhetorical question. The poem contains what? Rhetorical question. Number three, we have simile. That is that grows in us like a tumor. We have personification. The poem has personification. Yes, it contains personification. When our dead comes to us with their dead, exactly. That's what we call personification. Then again, the poem, another figure of speech, the poem contains what? Metaphor. It is metaphorical in nature. Then there is a particular line in the poem where the poet persona mocks Africans by what? By calling them three names. He said, for us, we are blind, deaf, and unworthy sons. A figure of speech that aims at hurling insult at a person is called sarcasm. So there is sarcasm in the poem. The poet persona is sarcastic. Why? It calls African people deaf, blind, and what? And unworthy sons. So these are the figure of speech that are prominent in the poem. So they are all under what? Poetic or literary devices. That is the end of today's class. I hope to see us again some other time. Good day, class.